Well, it's quite possible that we're witnessing the unraveling of one of the most scandalous cover-ups ever attempted. The scandalous cover-up I'm referring to is the all-out effort to stop the truth about the coronavirus's true origins from ever becoming known. Now, the cover-up involves many government officials, government and health agencies like the NIH, and most troubling of all, our legacy media. So I wanted to take you through a Vanity Fair piece that lays out a timeline of events that unfolded during the pandemic. Now, it's a little bit long, but it's incredibly important that you understand this. I don't tell people to go and read pieces, but I'm telling you to read this one. Why? Because it demonstrates a level of corruption and politicization that's just staggering. And it also demonstrates how broken and biased our supposed free press has become. So remember the official story from the beginning, right? From the CDC, the legacy press, Dr. Fauci, the Chinese Communist Party, was that this virus came from a wet market. However, you didn't have to be a genius to notice that the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or WIV, because we're tired of saying the full name, was located only miles away from said wet market, right? Now, this institute was known by our State Department for doing these gain-of-function experiments on coronaviruses. However, right from the beginning, to stop anyone from suggesting lab escape, The Lancet, which is a supposedly esteemed medical journal, published this rebuttal of the lab leak hypothesis, and it also intimated that such suggestions are entirely racist. Now, this is from the Vanity Fair article. It said that they published this statement, quote, on February 19th, 2020, that roundly rejected the lab leak hypothesis, effectively casting it as a xenophobic cousin to climate change denialism and anti-vaxxism. Signed by 27 scientists, the statement expressed, quote, solidarity with all scientists and health professionals in China, and it asserted that we stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin. Now, the Lancet statement effectively ended the debate over COVID-19's origins before it began. And then came that revelation that the Lancet statement was not only signed, but organized by a zoologist named Peter Daszak, who's repackaged U.S. government grants and allocated them to facilities conducting gain-of-function research, and among them, the Wuhan Institute of Virology itself, end quote. So who's Peter Daszak? Peter Daszak is the head of EcoHealth Alliance. He received grant money from guess who? Dr. Anthony Fauci, for guess what? Gain-of-function research at the WIV. But after his Lancet paper, Peter Daszak's Lancet paper was published, again, a statement organized by Daszak, investigators, all of this, they were bullied to stop looking into the pandemic's origin. Now, Daszak was the last person in the world who should have been asked to organize that Lancet statement on the lab leak. More on this cover-up from this Vanity Fair piece. It says, quote, in an internal memo obtained by Vanity Fair, Thomas DiNanno, former acting assistant secretary of the State Department's Bureau of Arms Control, Verification and Compliance, wrote that staff from two bureaus, his own and the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation, warned leaders within his bureau not to pursue an investigation into the origin of COVID-19 because it would open a can of worms, their direct quote, if it continued. As officials, State Department employees mostly at the meeting discussed what they could share with the public, they were advised by Christopher Park, the director of the State Department's biological policy staff in the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation, not to say anything that would point to the U.S. government's own role in gain-of-function research, according to documentation of the meeting obtained by Vanity Fair. Wow. And as the group probed that lab leak scenario, among other possibilities, Vanity Fair notes that its members were repeatedly advised not to open a Pandora's box. This according to 4 former State Department officials, all interviewed by Vanity Fair. And the admonitions, they smelled like a cover-up, said Thomas DiNanno, and I wasn't going to be part of it, end quote. So what was the Pandora's box that the State Department's Christopher Park didn't want to open? That if it ever came to light that American grant money helped in part funding the lab that leaked the coronavirus and started a worldwide pandemic, that it would be the equivalent of a Chernobyl disaster for virology, and it would effectively cut off grant money to this kind of virus research forever. This has been a huge point of debate in the scientific community. I mean, there are fights about this that have spilled over in the public as far back as 2014. So Christopher Park told other State Department officials to lie by omission, because to acknowledge the possibility of a lab leak would not only cut off funding, it would point back to the U.S. government's own role in gain-of-function research at the WIV. So in other words, this Chernobyl-like event, the pandemic, was potentially made possible. There's part of it was made possible by American taxpayers through grants greenlit from Dr. Fauci, packaged by Peter Daszak. So this is getting really ugly. And to keep all of this from coming out, it's very clear that the idea of a lab escape was actively being suppressed by U.S. government officials, but it gets even worse. According to the Vanity Fair piece, scientists threatened former CDC Director Robert Redfield's life for talking about the lab leak and telling CNN this. Watch.
I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory. Escaped. Other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
So here's what happened to Robert Redfield after that interview, according to Vanity Fair. He says, quote, to the publication, "I was threatened and ostracized because I proposed another hypothesis." He says, "I expected it from politicians. I didn't expect it from science." And what's more, Vanity Fair says Redfield immediately thought of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. A team could rule it out as a source of the outbreak in just a few weeks by testing researchers there for antibodies. Redfield formally reiterated his offer to send specialists, but Chinese officials didn't respond to his overture. And Redfield, a virologist by training, was suspicious of the WIV in part because he'd been steeped in the years-long battle over gain-of-function research, end quote. And that's that battle that I was telling you that's been going on for quite some time. But it wasn't just Robert Redfield who believed in the possibility of the lab escape theory. There were also other medical experts who held suspicions of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. For instance, Dr. Richard Ebright, Board of Governors, professor of chemistry and chemical biology at Rutgers University, said that from the very first reports of a novel bat-related coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, it took him, quote, a nanosecond or a picosecond, that's his quote, to consider a link to the WIV, because only 2 other labs in the world were doing similar research. He said, quote, "It's not a dozen cities, it's 3 places," end quote. So let's stop for just a second and think about the implications of this. We're supposed to believe many other medical experts immediately knew it could be from a lab, but Dr. Fauci didn't know the virus could be from a lab? Dr. Fauci, the NIH spokesman who authorized grants to the WIV, didn't know lab leak was a possibility? Well, guess who wasn't going along with all of this, according to Vanity Fair? Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump. They refused to run cover for Intel officials who felt that they were attempting to stop growing questions around the lab leak hypothesis. In fact, Miles Yu, this is from the Vanity Fair piece, as questions swirled, Miles Yu, the State Department's principal China strategist, noted that the WIV had remained largely silent. And a sidebar here, why that's so important is because WIV was considered at the time the gold standard in virology institutes. And that's why it was so weird that they were so very incredibly quiet. Yu, says Vanity Fair, who is fluent in Mandarin, began mirroring its website and compiling a dossier of questions about its research. And in April, he gave his dossier to Secretary of State Pompeo, who in turn publicly demanded access to the laboratories there. It's not clear whether Yu's dossier made its way to President Trump. But here is where the intimation is that it did. Now listen to this. On April 30th, says Vanity Fair 2020, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence put out a very ambiguous statement whose apparent goal was to suppress a growing furor around the lab leak theory. It said that the intelligence community, quote, concurs with the wide scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified, but would continue to assess whether the outbreak began through contact with infected animals, or if it was the result of an accident at a laboratory in Wuhan. Now, former Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger said it was pure panic. They were getting flooded with queries. Vanity Fair reports it as saying that somebody made the unfortunate decision to say, well, we basically know nothing, so let's put out a statement, direct quote. So this is where a couple of things here. First off, I want you to realize that Vanity Fair is not Town Hall. It's not Daily Caller. This is Vanity Fair. They're super far left. And these are not sources say. These are people who are named and they're going on record. That's huge. And also to point out the irony of this piece, because it kind of it really does confirm how corrupt our media is. Because this is what Vanity Fair says next. Quote, this is when it changed. Now remember when that dossier with Miles Yu giving it to President Trump. Vanity Fair says, then the bomb thrower in chief weighed in. At a press briefing just hours later, Trump contradicted his own intelligence officials and claimed that he had seen classified information indicating that the virus had come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Asked what the evidence was, he said, quote, I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that, end quote. Really? The bomb thrower in chief weighed in? How about the truth teller in chief? Regardless of what you think about Trump, and I've seen a lot of people on the left come out and say, were we all gaslit about this? Just as I was, I was thinking that this is a great piece by Vanity Fair. I understand it, but before you get too excited, they pepper this entire article with these idiotic partisan opinions that don't do anything to support their premise. In fact, it's distracting. Did it ever occur to Vanity Fair that the actual bomb here is that not a single person, not a single one of these intelligence officials or Dr. Fauci had the courage to say publicly what they were saying privately, what Trump was willing to say? That many scientists and experts, there was no scientific consensus here. They were all discussing the very real possibility of lab escape. And that this consensus on lab escape included medical experts on the left and right political spectrum. Instead, Vanity Fair calls Trump a bomb thrower for refusing to hide this fact from the American people. He's telling you the truth. And it made a lot of people mad. They said he poisoned the water. I was quite furious over this partisan reporting masquerading as journalistic observation over such an important issue. Because this is how you push even moderates to Trump's side. Or take this opinion. Here from Vanity Fair, they say, quote, Trump's premature statement poisoned the waters for anyone seeking an honest answer to the question of where COVID-19 came from, end quote. That's an infantile, partisan, gibberish bit. Vanity Fair just needed to write the story. The lab leak, that story, that could have been written months ago if anybody in the media cared to actually investigate it. This is what happens when you are so blinded by hatred for a political person that you can't even do your job. The media even politicized Trump's smart decision to end funding for WIV. This is from the article. They say, quote, as the pandemic raged, the collaboration between EcoHealth Alliance and the WIV wound up in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. At a White House COVID-19 press briefing, this was April 17th, 2020, days before, by the way, that remark from Trump. A reporter from and this is how they say this, listen to this, conspiratorial right-wing media outlet Newsmax, for the love, asked Trump a factually inaccurate question about a $3.7 million National Institute of Health grant to a level 4 lab in China. Why would the U.S. give a grant like that to China, the reporter asked. Trump had responded, well, we'll end that grant very quickly, adding, who is president then, I wonder? So then, a week later, an NIH official notified Peter Daszak in writing that his grant was terminated, and during testimony before Congress, Dr. Anthony Fauci said that, well, that order came right from the White House. The decision fueled a firestorm. So after that, 81 Nobel laureates in science denounced the decision in an open letter to Trump health officials. 60 Minutes ran a segment that focused on the Trump administration's short-sighted politicization of science, end quote. So Trump rightly shut down taxpayer funding to a lab in China that may well be responsible for helping start a pandemic that killed over 3 million people. And Trump is the one politicizing science, according to 81 Nobel laureates in 60 Minutes. So what are we to take from all this? The biggest takeaway is that our media is the fourth estate, maybe even the fifth column. It's one thing when the government lies, when health agencies lie, when officials like Dr. Fauci lie repeatedly. We know government and powerful people with agendas lie. But it's scary when our media refuses to do their job and hold them to account. Our so-called free press, when functioning properly, is our last line of defense against corruption. It is a check on government tyranny. It is vital that the media remain unbiased. Objectivity is sacred. But even in this Vanity Fair piece, we see that they still work so hard to lay the blame for the suppression of the lab leak theory on, bizarrely, Trump, who, according to their own article, is one of the only people in this whole hot mess who loudly proclaimed the truth. And then they lit him up for that too. So what has happened here, not just with the WIV is scandalous, but also what has happened with the media is beyond scandalous, and it's scary. I want to make a connection for you. So yesterday, I caught this tweet from the editor of one of communist China's newspapers. And this is what they had tweeted, quote, "The Tiananmen Square incident, or the Tiananmen incident, gave Chinese society a political vaccine shot, which has enabled us to be immune to any color revolution. 31 years later, riots emerged and spread in the United States. They only think of exporting it, but forget to prepare vaccine for themselves." End quote. That's a disgusting tweet from a Chinese state media communist entity celebrating a massacre. And there are some reports that the CCP killed, the numbers fluctuate from 250 to 10,000, who were peacefully protesting in the Tiananmen Square massacre. 32 years ago today, by the way. That's when that photo you see was taken, June 4th. We'll never know how many people died because the Communist Party of China never tells the truth, just like they lied about the origins of the coronavirus. But you can see from that tweet that CCP is quite proud of killing their own citizens because it was a political vaccine shot that they say inoculated them from any future protests of their corrupt regime. And you know what? In Hong Kong today, too, 32 years ago, for all those years, they've always held a demonstration. And you see that political vaccine shot in action. That's an evil tweet. It's from the Fourth Estate, the CCP state-run media. So stay with me here. The reason I bring this up is because our media is the Fourth Estate here in the United States, or the Fifth Column if you want to talk about an entity that seeks to cause division from within. The Vanity Fair article is exposing not only the total corruption of our government, health agencies, and members of our State Department, it's also a real-time demonstration of our media continuing to spin the narrative around the Wuhan virus's origins in order to promote moral lies. And rather than hold people to account over and over, media blame Trump for the lab leak theory not gaining traction, a theory the media suppressed along with officials in our own government. And again, I want to show you why this kind of lying in the media is so damaging to democracy. Because if our media fails to tell the truth, then we, the citizens, we're the ones that end up living in darkness. We can't get a clear picture of reality. And without the light of truth, we don't know what actions to take, how to protect ourselves from a virus, for example, or how to vote in the next election, or what to believe about anything. To show you just how dangerous the Fourth Estate media can be, I mentioned this just a moment ago. Here's an image of the annual candlelight vigils in Tiananmen Square since the 1989 massacre. This is in Victoria Park in Hong Kong, and you can see, little by little, the memory of what the CCP did to their own people is disappearing. In fact, I read a piece that said any people under the age of 25 don't really understand or know what happened in Tiananmen Square. And so this year, because China brutally took over Hong Kong, there are no demonstrations in Victoria Park. No crowds commemorating, holding a memorial between 8 and 8:09 p.m. their time, memorializing this despicable massacre. Why? Because the CCP has erased the incident from the internet. That picture that we showed you is illegal in China. Video of it's illegal in China. And media in China, state-owned. They refuse to acknowledge it at all whatsoever. The people still remember. In fact, in Hong Kong, at 8 o'clock, people who were out in the street held up their cell phone lights. Little act of resistance. But each year, that commemoration of the mass murder of thousands of innocent Chinese citizens by their own government is waning. Memories fade away. And over time, the memory of Tiananmen Square, maybe from some people, especially the youth, it might disappear from their minds altogether. That is the power of the Fourth Estate. And one day, considering how corrupt our media already is, maybe the memory of a lab escape in which a virus killed over 500,000 Americans will disappear from our minds too. Memory hold by our growing Fourth Estate, a state-owned media, it seems at this point, at least in spirit, that increasingly seems to be in bed with U.S. government officials who carry water for the same CCP that memory hold Tiananmen Square. Folks need to wake up. That's the real woke that needs to happen. Otherwise, that same tyranny is coming to America, and there won't be a headline about it. Next up, We have an absolute meltdown on our border, and the Fourth Estate has decided to not really cover the story because it's not flattering to the Biden administration. But Texas Congressman Chip Roy is here to tell us what we need to know. Not very good. Keep it here. So after the show, I want all of you to visit this website, preparewiththefirst.com. It is a special website set up by our friends at My Patriot Supply, and every day, it seems like things are kind of nutty out there. Every day there's a new headline, a new discovery, and you don't really have a lot of peace of mind. But the best way to kind of help do that, help give you a little peace of mind, is preparation, having emergency food and water. My Patriot Supply is America's leading preparedness company, and they're here to help you become self-reliant no matter what happens next. But you can't wait for something bad to happen and then react. That's not smart. You should act now before we see any kind of stock market crash or hyperinflation, civil unrest, or hacking of a meat plant. My Patriot Supply has been in business for over a dozen years, serving millions of families and earning 39,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their food is specially packaged to stay fresh for up to 25 years so that when you prepare today, it'll be there when you need it. Right now, you can save $50 on their 4-week emergency food kit at preparewiththefirst.com. The meals are delicious. They provide 2,000 calories per day. No other brand comes close. That's preparewiththefirst.com. Joining us is Texas Congressman Chip Roy, and I know I'm going to talk to him about the crisis on the border and the border czar, the vice president that he's going to debate. But first off, we were wondering where he was. And so during our conversation before the camera started rolling, he's in front of his garden. So now I'm really feeling very envious of his garden because his garden is way better than my garden. And it looks like a professional thing in the back, Congressman. I mean, I'm very envious right now. And I'm sorry to start the interview off like this, but I can't help it.
No, well, all the credit goes to my family. I mean, I did some of the work and get the fence posts to get the holes dug in this rocky terrain here in the hill country near Dripping Springs. But, my wife and kids do all the work to get the vegetables growing and keep that going while I'm going back and forth to D.C. So, we like to have a little bit of independence out here in Texas. As you know, Dana, we got 10.5 acres, and that was part of the reason we moved way outside of the city so we could live off of the land and do what, our forefathers did in coming to Texas.
Yeah. And there's nothing like good homegrown vegetables. I do have to ask you, are you dealing with like some serious deer down there? Is that the reason that your fence is so high?
Yeah, amen. You got it figured out. Yeah, just this morning, in fact, I'd shoot you a picture. I'll text you one after this of a little fawn and a bunch of deer out in our front yard, eating the grass. But we have to have the 8-foot fence in order to keep them out of the garden.
Yeah, well, there you go. Fences do work. Now watch this amazing segue from the fence, your garden fence, to now the fencing at the border. That's why we're here, everybody. That's why we're on the first. You have challenged the vice president, the border czar, Kamala Harris, to a debate. She's not yet gone there. She's not yet visited the border, which I think is, kind of important if you're the border czar and you're in charge of it. You probably should go there, check it out, talk to Border Patrol agents. I know that you've issued a challenge to a debate on that. Has she responded at all? Have you heard from her office?
Yeah, and I didn't really expect her to respond. I mean, basically, my view on it is pretty simple. I mean, you've been in charge of this allegedly now for, 2.5 months, and you literally have not even sought fit to come to Texas, much less to the border. And yet today, I'm told she's in Guatemala asking questions about what they can do to stop the surge. I mean, newsflash, how about you just secure the border, right? I mean, this is not rocket science. We just need to do our job. And she's unable to do it. So I just basically said, look, you're unwilling to come to the border. I'll meet you anywhere you want to go, and let's have a debate about border issues. But she won't take it up. There is literally no defense for the incompetence. And it's not just incompetence, it's purposeful. It's just insane what they're doing to our border and allowing basically now 600,000 over that apprehensions, 300,000 gotaways and releases, more fentanyl in the first 4 months of this year than in all of 2020. We have cartels running our border from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to Big Bend and beyond. They're getting enriched, moving human beings for sex and human trafficking, which we see occurring in Texas, reaching all the way up in our communities in Bernie, San Antonio. You guys are seeing it in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And yet she's allegedly in charge and won't even come to the border. I'll debate her anywhere she wants to go.
Yeah. It should be down there, maybe in the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley down there, since that's such a hotbed of crossing. Here's the question. I was looking at some of the numbers, and you were giving us some of the stats as to the hundreds of thousands so far, and it's way more than it ever has been at this peak period. I realize that when people are getting processed, et cetera, they get these dates. They're supposed to go before an immigration judge, and then it's supposed to be sorted out. But, Congressman, how often is that actually fulfilled? Like, how often do people go through all of those steps and actually go to a court before an immigration judge?
Well, first of all, the people who come to our country, there are legal ways to come here, but you've got a lot of people coming here and they're claiming asylum, right? When you go down to the border, you probably talked to Louis Gohmert. I ran into him down on the border. I took pictures showing these signs that are down by the Rio Grande that say asilo with an arrow saying seeking asylum. Yet when you actually process the claims made by people coming from all over the world, they don't really have legitimate claims to asylum under our law, right? That's basically a fiction. They're using that as a claim to come here for economic opportunity. Now, no, I don't blame the immigrants any more than you do. Look, I'm a Christian. I want people to be able to, have a great life and prosper, and I want them to live in freedom like we do. But we need to expand freedom around the globe. We need to have a strong Western Hemisphere. We can't just have an open doors policy that endangers our citizens, have our ranches getting overrun, have our hospitals and schools getting overrun, while migrants get abused by cartels and they get enriched, while Democrats pat themselves on the back in the false name of compassion that somehow what they're doing is good. What you just describing, it doesn't occur. We now have people being released. There's no processing. And when we do process them and send them out and tell them to come back for a court date, they don't come back. This is all a fiction, and it's endangering our country and the immigrants who seek to come here.
Yeah, exactly. And we keep seeing photos of those and video of the children as well. I was reading backstory about one of the little boys who was dropped off. This was a couple of months ago. Thankfully, Border Patrol found him wandering around in the desert. Apparently, he had an uncle in Florida who could only afford to get the boy over. But then there were questions in his home country with his home country's government after his mom came over as to whether the mother was a fit parent. So the country from which they were coming from was saying, if you allow these strangers to take your child and drop them off in the middle of the desert, maybe we should contest your custody. I think it was back in Nicaragua. Maybe we should contest your custody back here at home. That is a legitimate question, though, because these are little kids that we're seeing with coyotes. And I just, after what a lot of this footage and the photographs that I've seen, especially from ranchers who just are out doing the work on their land and they discover kids, you do kind of have to question, do we really want these kids to go back actually to their parents? Because there's no way, no matter what, there's no way I'd be letting any of my kids at that age take that kind of trip with strangers.
Well, Dana, I think you and I may have talked about this before, but the last time I was down at the Rio Grande was just a few weeks back, and I was down there where they're doing all the processing. I sat there for a number of hours late into the middle of the morning visiting with migrants, and I visited with about 50 migrants, one of whom was this 7-year-old little girl, and she was by herself with no mom, no dad, no uncle, no aunt, no brother, no sister, and she was by herself, and she'd come all the way up from either Guatemala or Honduras, I can't remember. And I talked to this little boy who was with her. I said, well, where did you run into her? And he's about halfway through Mexico, right? This is unbelievable what we're allowing to occur. What parents are doing, obviously. And, look, I can't question whatever decisions they make about sending their kids and trying to seek freedom or whatever. All I know is our country, the thing we can control is we could secure our border tomorrow. It's not a matter, we don't need more white papers. We don't need more ideas. We literally just need the willpower to do our job, which is to enforce the laws on the books, secure our border, not allow asylum to be abused, end catch and release, use Title 42 to stop people coming across the border when there might be a pandemic and communicable disease, and do the things that we could do literally immediately, including continuing to build the fence and put infrastructure in place, which is what Border Patrol tells you they need, is what people in Texas tell you they need. And frankly, the people I talk to in Texas, they're starting to ask whether it's worth it to be a part of the union anymore if literally the United States of America refuses to defend the border that is our border in Texas. And it's a legitimate question, right? $30 trillion in debt, weakened position around the world, no security on our borders. What is the United States of America government doing for the people of Texas? That's what I want to know, besides interfering with our rights to liberty, masking our children, shoving them into corners, scaring the hell out of them with lies from Dr. Fauci, and then having a wide open border that abuses our way of life and has fentanyl pouring into our schools. It's an abomination, and we really got to start talking about what we need to do to just reclaim freedom.
Exactly. Talking to Congressman Chip Roy, and that's what we need a commission investigating. You mentioned Dr. Fauci, and of course, I talked about this on radio today. 32 years ago today, there was that one lone man in Tiananmen Square who stood against the column of tanks. Nobody knows who this unidentified man is. He sort of came to be the face of that actual true resistance there. And so here we are 32 years later. We have all of these emails. You just mentioned Dr. Fauci, and what we've discovered, not just through those emails, but also this Vanity Fair report, is that a lot of people were gaslit, which kind of brings me to my question with you on this. I remember, let me set it up. I remember when the president came out, it was April 30th of 2020, last year. This was that morning, there was an intelligence agency, DNI, they had this very ambiguous report about, well, we really don't think that it's a lab leak theory. We think that this is, perhaps, just natural occurrence, and that's how this pandemic developed. And then Trump came out later that day and just pretty much cut him off at the knees during the press conference and said, yeah, I've seen information otherwise. Maybe it was that dossier that was handed to Mike Pompeo from one of the members of the State Department that was looking at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I wanted to get your thoughts on this because I really feel as though not just the president, but the rest of the nation was gaslit by the very same people that we're supposed to be able to rely on for transparency. Your thoughts?
Well, there's no question, Dana. Look, we've been being lied to for over a year, for sure. I mean, if you go back to 2018, you mentioned the State Department, and we had those reports initially about the concerns about the Institute of Virology, the kinds of lab work that was going on there. I mean, again, that's going back to 2018. Then we saw what unfolded with Dr. Li Wenliang, who was a whistleblower in China. And of course, what did they do? They beat him. They tried to silence him. And God bless him, he was actually trying to say, hey, guys, there's a problem here. Of course, he ended up dying of the virus in February of 2020. Now you have the Chinese propaganda network, right? These Chinese alleged, news organizations, which are basically arms of the state, who are pumping out all this garbage about Tiananmen Square and saying how this is somehow propaganda and how this is somehow the West trying to infiltrate China. Well, God bless those who are seeking freedom, whether it's in Hong Kong or Taiwan, those individuals that stood there in Tiananmen Square, because the people of China, they're the ones being gaslit by the Communist Chinese Party. And you've got Dr. Fauci and a bunch of elitists who are more interested in their magazine covers than they are about getting the truth out to the American people, who refuse to challenge and take on the Chinese Communist Party and would rather go around and have Americans be masked, shut our economy down, the most powerful economy in the history of the world, which endangers the entire world. And they did it out of fear, but they did it most of all, Dana, for power. That's what this is all about. It's for popularity, power, prestige among the elite, because they don't trust the people, and they'd rather saddle up to people in their cocktail circuit and make nice with the Communist Chinese Party than stand up for the American workers out there.
Exactly. They value that proximity to power. Unbelievable. And if that one lone man can stand against a column of tanks in the Communist Chinese government, it's amazing that a nation of people, or at least, our media here, can't even do the same. We'll continue to follow that, though. Congressman Chip Roy, good to see you. Have a great weekend.
God bless you, Dana. Take care. Best to your family.
You too. Thank you. All right, folks, next up, vaccine passports to eat out or just to go to a bar. In some states, that's actually starting to happen. Also, a cyber attack on our meat industry. That's going to affect grilling life coming up this summer. So Chef Andrew Gruel will join us next to walk us all through it. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's vision of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company is inviting you to enjoy your coffee. And by that, they don't just mean the great taste, but more so, the places you drink it, the adventures that it fuels and inspires, and most of all, those moments that are served alongside your Black Rifle coffee. So whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over before kicking ass at work or cracking a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever the summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours. Use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase in your first Coffee Club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee, Black Rifle Coffee. Joining us now is Chef Andrew Gruel. He is the owner of Slapfish Restaurant, and he's been fighting for small businesses across the country with his 86 Struggle Fund that's all about work restaurant employees. And we wanted to talk with him about these vaccine passports that some people apparently are going to start requiring for bars and restaurants in some states, apparently. And of course, that cyber attack on our meat industry and how that is affecting restaurants. A lot to discuss. Andrew, it's good to see you. Really grateful for what you do, because you're really speaking out for a lot of people who otherwise I don't know that anybody would have been able to bring their plight forward the way you and others have. So kudos to you on that. And I mean, it's been heartbreaking. I just saw a statistic the other day. It said 10% of restaurants that have closed during the pandemic have closed permanently. 10%. That's a significant number of establishments, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to think that, some of this, I don't know, it breaks the heart.
Yeah, and I actually think that the number is going to end up being a lot higher, and we're going to see the ramifications over the next couple of years. So, yeah, it's definitely a big issue.
Yeah, and you've been working really, really hard, like I said, with 86 Struggle, what you've been doing. I want to come back to the restaurant workers and specifically like the labor shortages or the perception of labor shortages. But you've been tweeting quite a bit. And by the way, we love what you do. And I have a question about the best way to bake bacon, like oven or pan after this, because I'm going to get an expert. This is a huge debate in my house, and I got to have like a professional, actual like culinary expert settle this. But you were talking about the cyber attack against the JBS meat plant. I didn't realize that so much. I mean, I knew meat processing is pretty centralized, which I'm not entirely a fan of. But I didn't realize that this is 20% of the United States beef supply. That's pretty scary, and it also, I think, shows that securing infrastructure, whether it's like a grid or a gas line. I just think that that's like an ad for terrorists. If they wanted to do something to the United States and the citizenry, it's so centralized. There's an easy way to do it. Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, and this is something that I've talked about way before the pandemic to begin with, about centralizing our food systems. And, it's happening across various industries. But what we've seen through the pandemic was the final pieces of emerge between government and big business, right? Big ag, big pharma now. And what you've done is you've basically given 3 or 4 companies a monopoly over every single thing that we put into our bodies. And the way in which they do that is that they overregulate the industry so that none of these small and medium-sized players can get into it. We see that even in the restaurant space. And look at what happened with restaurants through the pandemic, right? I mean, they took out the small businesses, small restaurants, and they basically gave all of that money to Amazon, to DoorDash, Main Street to Silicon Valley. So what you said is exactly correct, is that we are threatened right now because all they have to do is just take out, a JBS in this situation, and there you go, 20% of our beef and chicken supply. We see it with foodborne illnesses, right? I mean, you have an E. coli outbreak in one state, and then suddenly nobody can eat spinach across the entire country because it's a monoculture, right? You've got one specific producer for each one of these products as opposed to all of these small independent businesses.
Right. No, and that's a great point. And you're talking about how centralized some of this is. So during the pandemic, I did not realize, and I feel goofy for not knowing this, I didn't realize all of the regulations that go into processing, for instance, right? So there was, I think at the very start of the pandemic, there was discussions of meat shortages and then how when all the restaurants closed, all of these ranchers, I'm in Texas, they had no idea to do with this like surplus of cattle. I mean, they had more head than they needed. And I also love animals. So I'm like, I didn't want to see these, these cattle, their lives just being wasted. So my husband and I were like, well, let's get a steer. Let's just buy right from the ranchers and get something grass-fed. I mean, we come from a family of hunters. We believe in the ethical harvesting from nature. We have, venison, super healthy meat. I'm like, let's fill our freezer and let's have, we know where it comes from. I literally have video of our steer. He was adorable and he was also delicious. But then it was the processing. So all of the processors were backed up, and all of the processors who did wild game, they were barred from actually processing cattle and beef. And I don't know if that was a state regulation, but it was so difficult just to get it processed. Why do we really need regulations like that say, well, no, you can't just go if you buy a steer, if you do what we did and you want to go get it processed, maybe it's somebody who's does venison or turkey or something like that. No, you have to go to this. Why is the government weighing in on this? That's insane.
Of course, and that's a question that I've asked. It's the USDA, it's the FDA. I mean, it runs the gamut, but it's the federal government, right? Why is the federal government involved in this? I can understand local jurisdictions, local ordinances, and we obviously have to have some sort of a framework whereby we make sure that we're providing healthy food and there's certain regulations and standards, but that can all be done on a local level. It doesn't need to be done one way in New York City in the same way as it is in California. I mean, granted, don't get me wrong, Cuomo and Newsom are obviously pen pals, but it doesn't have to happen that way. But you've got this massive monstrosity that's effectively taking away all of the artisanal nature that our food system 50 years ago was known for and is no longer known for. 50 years ago, 60% of Americans were somehow connected to the farm industry, and right now it's less than 0.01%.
And there's just something that is just so much more. I mean, we're foodies, so I appreciate what you do, and I'm very familiar with you and what you do. So this is very cool to talk with you. And there's something that's it's just so much better when you know where your food has come from. Like, we have a huge garden. It's not as big as our congressman's guest. He's going to be on with us here later. But we have it's just so much better to know where your produce comes from, to know where your meat comes from. One last question for you. Actually, I have two last questions for you before I let you go. You made a really great point about when we were talking about vaccine passes and everything else, about the treatment of entry-level workers. And so entry-level workers, specifically in the food industry, have just really gone through the ringer and are still doing it, still going through it as restaurants are opening. It seems almost abusive to me to make these same people act like bouncers for these establishments and demand to see people's vaccine passport. That just seems like it's putting them in a very a confrontational position that they should not be put into. Talk to us a little bit about this, because you've tweeted about it.
Yeah, and look, the litmus test for that is just go onto any Twitter conversation about a vaccine, okay? Go into the comments section and feel the violence, the anger, the vitriol, right, on both sides of the aisle. Now throw a 19-year-old in the middle of that, put those people face to face, and have them actually have to judge that argument. That's what you're asking entry-level workers to do. These poor kids who are just trying to get their first job and understand the nature of holding a job. And now you're asking them to be police officers for vaccine passports? Come on, that's absurd.
It is absurd. Last question for you, Chef Gruel. So, big debate in my household, in my family actually. Bacon, is it better in the pan? Or I think it's kind of better baking it in the oven. I need a real expert to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's about the cut of the bacon, but for just an average cut of bacon, I love bacon as well. And what I like to do, though, a little trick is that take a sheet pan, line your bacon out, and then put another sheet pan on top of it so it bakes and also presses it. So you get that nice, perfect bacon chip, right? So it doesn't curl up. It bakes a lot even. There's much more, congruity to the piece of bacon. It's a lot more even.
So I have not been putting the sheet on the top, and I'm saving this, I'm cutting this as a clip, and I'm sending it to literally everybody in my family, because this has been like it's been a huge thing. Chef Andrew Gruel, I appreciate you coming on with us, and thanks for what you do as well for the restaurant industry and just for all these small businesses out there. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, you as well.
All right, folks, coming up, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a member of the Squad. She has a proposal about solving a problem like reducing crime with a very interesting idea, although I'm not quite sure that it makes a lot of sense. Keep it here. Well, it turns out that crime is not a problem that has existed from the beginning of all time with no easy pat solutions. Nope, crime is really a problem unique to America, and there's an easy fix. Just ask AOC. Watch.
If we want to reduce violent crime, if we want to reduce the number of people in our jails, the answer is to stop building more of them. The answer is to make sure that we actually build more hospitals, we pay organizers, we get people mental health care and overall health care, employment, etc. It's to support communities, not throw them away.
Yeah, that's right. You can now reduce crime by simply getting rid of jails. I mean, it was so obvious, but we missed it. But that's why we're lucky to have AOC in Congress, because when she's not condemning Israel or our police, our hardworking police, she can be counted on to solve very tough problems like crime. Just stand in front of some microphones and say things like, building fewer jails will make crime go away. And then she can count on Fourth Estate Press that really likes her to never, ever ask her a question about how that's going to work. You know, though, AOC's idea got us thinking. If building fewer prisons can reduce crime, why not have no prisons at all? I mean, then we would have zero crime. That's easy, right? Maybe if we had no landfills, we'd have no trash. Or if we had no hospitals, we'd have no disease. What if we had no police? Then we'd have no criminals. I mean, she already beat us to that one, so that's, that sucks. But we want to be fair. We know that she's trying to say in her very naive way that if we just spent more on mental health or after-school programs or a few trillion additional dollars on this or that, then we could change human nature and make crime go away. Tell that to Abel, who was murdered by his brother Cain out of jealousy, the first ever murder recorded in human history in the good book. Apparently, though, they lacked really good after-school programs back then, too. In any case, AOC has a ton of enthusiasm, a cool Instagram feed, and she apparently was a pretty decent bartender. But as a congresswoman, no. She doesn't seem to understand that it's not the lack of government that's the problem, it's the human heart. And it's been that way since the beginning of time. We steal and kill because we're envious and greedy for what we don't have. Our default mode as human beings is selfishness. That's why the aliens don't visit us. Just watch any child on the playground and you know it's true. Goodness and virtue, this is something that is demonstrated and taught, not by the government though, but by parents. The human heart, yes, is very deceptive and corruptive, and AOC would know that if she just examined her own. It turns out while AOC is busy talking about how she can solve all the crime and how we can eliminate all poverty with big government, she has failed to take care of her own abuela in Puerto Rico. And here are pictures of her grandmother's home that she shared when she visited with her recently. Now, AOC used this moment to say that it was a lack of government intervention, specifically from the United States, as the reason that her grandmother lives in squalor after the damage done by Hurricane Maria. It's the government's fault, according to AOC. Meanwhile, she wears $2,000 suits and she drives one of the most expensive Teslas. I think the monthly payment for a lease is $499. And her grandmother's living conditions? Well, that's your responsibility, the American taxpayer, not hers. But this is the human heart, AOC's heart to be exact, on display. See, it's easier for AOC to blame others for her grandmother's living conditions than for her to take care of her grandmother herself. This way, she can drive a Tesla while blaming America for her own grandmother's poverty. And she can throw out solutions to crime like building fewer jails while letting other Americans who live in impoverished areas suffer at the hands of criminals while she lives just squarely, securely in a very posh neighborhood with armed bodyguards. It's a little bit selfish, narcissistic, and yes, cold-hearted, especially for a socialist who supposedly has a bleeding heart. That does it for us this week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you back here on Monday and start another week. Have a great weekend, and don't bend the knee.